Before week 7 of the LEC begins, we want to acknowledge the escalating crisis in Ukraine. Our thoughts are with our fans, teams, players, broadcasters, and everyone across the world affected in this uncertain time. We have decided to move forward with today's show after checking in with our teams and staff, and we'll continue to offer our ongoing support to them. For those joining us for this afternoon's broadcast, we hope the show can provide you with some brief solace. The broadcast team and those involved in the LEC send their love to each and every one of you.
Germany, home of the LEC, for week 7 of the spring season. There's only 5 games left to play for each team, and big names such as Perks and Elyoya are still fighting for a spot in the top 6. As we will here see the Mad Lions entering the arena for an all-important battle against XL in Game 1. There's XL, in fact, so they will be playing on stage as it is the first game of the day, which should net us with some extra action coming into the week. My name is Shax, and I'm joined by Nymera and a very special guest, Broxa. Hello.
Hello, good to be back. Excited to be here.
I have to say, it's so cool to see you here in the studio. We've, of course, missed you with your time away. What's it like for you being back here in the studio where you played for so long?
Well, I gotta admit, it feels a little strange being on this side now, not being over on stage playing the games, but actually getting to talk about the games, expressing myself.
Flaming your ex-teammates.
Yeah, flaming my ex-teammates, I'm gonna keep an extra eye out for them, of course, but yeah, just looking forward to get to analyze some games and talk about them for once.
Awesome. And Nymera, you were a guest, but we can't seem to get rid of you.
I figured out that if I just stay overnight, they actually just can't get rid of me. I just wait until everyone leaves, so I'm back.
I see. All jokes aside, we're also super happy to have you back. And it's the first time that we are on the desk together, so that's going to be great. Let's take a look at the standings as how we are getting into week 7 and see how things have developed in the race for playoffs. The good news is that no team is eliminated yet from those playoffs, but the bad news for Astralis, for instance, is that even if they win every single game, it's going to be really hard, and they need to win every single game. Same for Team BDS, it's going to be difficult, and I think, Nymera, it's fair to say that we are mostly looking at the Mad Lions, SK Gaming, Team Vitality, and XL for those playoff spots. Oh, your mic is dead. I'm going to go to Broxa first.
Yeah, so I think all these teams are really interesting right now. There's a really close battle to get to playoffs. I think SK is one of the teams to look at. Was really interesting, was been doing well recently. Obviously, XL also coming in with Finn, with Mickey, Makoon really showing up big time. There's a lot of competition for these last playoff spots, and it's pretty hard to predict who's going to make it, but very much looking forward to see how it plays out.
Absolutely, and I believe I'm back with some stopgap measures. But yeah, I mean, obviously, it's coming down to a very fine line, as it always seems to in this region, and that heats up the tension too. Yes,
and it's nice that it comes down to it, and it comes down to the wire, but it's kind of not the same teams as you always expect to be in those spots. XL having a chance, Mad Lions maybe falling out of those playoffs, SK Gaming back in the mix. Of course, because there is so much on the line in terms of playoffs and things are moving, dependent on every result. We will keep you updated on everything this week and the playoff stakes. I do want to take a minute to also talk about the top of the table just a little bit, just because Misfits is there and they are now on a 5-game winning streak. Broxa, are you surprised with how well the Misfits are playing so far this season?
I'm slightly surprised, yes. I think there's been a lot of talk about Vitio here on the broadcast. I think Vitio has been amazing, but there's some unsung heroes on Misfits as well that hasn't gotten too much spotlight, too much attention. I think Hirit has been amazing in top lane, just been like He has barely gotten any attention from his team, but he's just always performing, always dishing out a lot of damage and whipping out some carry performances. I think Neon, same thing, and just in general how Misfits come together, how decisive they are and how they support their carries, I think is really impressive and has really set them up for a great start.
Yeah, I love that you called out, well, we always talk about VTO because yes, he's been playing amazing, but it really is the triumvirate of damage in Herod, in Neon, and in VTO that has been doing work for those Misfits.
100%, because, you know, it's very hard to carry alone consistently, and I think that as a team, it's been an ensemble performance, right? Even the early game of Zlatan and Mercer has really stepped up. We called that out in the early split. They've responded to it, and it's great to see this team kind of working through and evolving to a point where they actually can be potentially title contenders.
And on top of that, the players that we then don't talk about too much because they're the new ones, like the likes of Mercer, have also really been developing, and that is very exciting when you look at a team like that, knowing that that ceiling is not yet reached.
100%. And you look at, I mean, there was actually one of the games they lost, which I really loved, was one where he just gets a level 1 Nautilus hook, which turns around a game versus a Caitlyn bot lane. And just having that presence of mind, even in a newer player, to say this is the play that will turn the game, that's important to see, and that's something you can really build on as players like that.
And Misfits are for sure strong contenders in the fight for first, alongside Rogue and Fnatic. And Nymera wanted to take a look at who the outstanding performers on those teams are.
Thank you very much, Shox. Now I'm going to have to do this with a handheld mic as well. But last time I was here, I mentioned a few names that I thought would be important in deciding the scramble for playoff spots. Now I'm going to go a little bit higher in the standings and shine a light onto 3 of our most standout players in this split of the LEC. Now, we are going to start with VTO. We talk about him much. We're going to talk about him even more now, because while Misfits have found incredible form as a whole roster in recent weeks, much of their successes in the start of their spring was through their mid laner extraordinaire. He was playing champions like Sylas or his famed Zoe, while the rest of the league was locked up in the dreaded but powerful Victor Corki meta. And it worked. He would take matters into his own hands and find results from it. And now that his team have started to sort out that early game, I think the scariest thought to have as a rival to Misfits is that VTO might not have even showed his final form yet. But of course, he's not uncontested amongst the stars of Europe for the most impactful players or most on-form players. Because I can't remember a time where a support player has ever had as much sway over a game as Hylissang has shown throughout Spring 2022. Because if he and Upset win the 2v2 in bot lane, that's kind of it. That's just lights out. He's brought back his Pyke with a vengeance. His Thresh is doing incredibly well. And even picks like a Zillion, he's making look like a Leona with his double bomb engages. And yet, that's not the end of the conversation, because we haven't even featured anyone from a first place team in Rogue. Questions were asked about their jungle swap in the off-season, and Malorang has answered all of them with flair, but he's not gone about it in the typical EU manner. Malorang's come in with a different mindset to most EU junglers. He skips camps to find gank opportunities on unpredictable timers, sacrificing XP and farm leads to hand crushing advantages to his powerful solo laners. So later today, both Hylissang and Malorang in top form will clash as Fnatic and Rogue will face off in an epic duel for first place during Game 4.
I think Rogue regular season is always very strong. I don't really know how to do it in the regular split, but they always seem to just play really well.
We might have been so much ahead from other teams in terms of scoreboard, but this doesn't matter, right? Anything can still happen, and we're just being really serious and professional in every single game.
The absolute confidence as they finish Fnatic off slowly but surely, a 6-0 start.
The way they play, I feel like, is very solid and predictable at the same time, which is strength and their weakness all these years. And maybe they're different now and stronger, but the last 3 playoffs I played against them, I won.
DP ult comes in, but it doesn't look like it's going to be enough. Inspired now following up, he's taking away Niski. Maybe this is a chance to turn the power of the Viego. It's done it once, but it will not do it in this fight.
They don't really punish him going for like weird stuff as much. I think when both laners and junglers level up a little bit more and get a little bit better at tracking what Malorang is doing, I think he can get punished both losing camps and giving up a lot of stuff.
Onuamne is going to be in trouble here. Should just be a one-shot combo. They're going to pull it back. They're going to fish for it. Rogue on the bottom side, killing Humanoid. It's a perfect 1-for-1 trade.
Super exciting battle later in the day. And as always, we care very much what you at home all think about basically everything, but specifically this match, Fnatic versus Rogue. You can head over to discord.lec.gg and cast your vote in the voting channel, and we'll check up with your votes later. Let's start by talking about Rogue, who is again fighting for first and in first place, which is something that has been normal here in the LEC for a year or two, Broxa. But what have you thought about the way they have been in first so far? And do you see differences with the Rogue that was in first last year?
I think the Rogue we're seeing right now is very different from the one we saw last year. I think they're still showing a lot of consistencies, but in a different way. And one of the big things that has changed for them is bringing in Melrank, like Tryndamere just talked about, with him playing almost the opposite of what Inspired used to play. Inspired was kind of typical EU jungle style, I would say, very focused on farming, being efficient, whereas Melrank, he's happy to give up camps to get his laners ahead. And I think the combination of having a really selfless jungler that's able to sacrifice himself for the lanes, and the fact that they have so strong lanes to play around, you know, he just hops right in, gives the lanes lead, the lanes take over in mid-game, and the game is won.
I guess
beautiful.
That's the key. The laners have to be good, right? The
Well,
laners have to be able to do it, otherwise...
Obviously, as a jungler, it's like, it's kind of a trust thing, you know?
Yeah.
It's like, I sacrifice myself, so you guys better carry me, right?
Yeah,
And
it's a trust fall.
Yeah.
I see that. And Tryndamere, yeah, for the side of Rogue, because they've gotten so much criticism over the years, right? Oh, well, you're so cool, calm, and collected, and you're winning, but do you have the clutch? It does feel like they've leveled up in that department.
Yeah, and I think that they have found a winning formula. I think the real test will be actually whether they can play on multiple modes. I think when we get to the best ofs eventually, there might be a question about actually can they play multiple styles. We've seen 1 or 2 styles really, really well out of them, to the point where basically teams cannot beat them while they're on form. The question is, can they go that next step? And we're yet to see that quite yet.
How much is there in that toolbox? Let's talk about their opponents in this match. Fnatic, Broxa, of course, the Fnatic legend himself. This is one of our super teams, actually, this season in the LEC. How do you think they're doing?
I think Fnatic has been a very interesting team to watch the split. I think while they've had some hiccups here and there with some games not going their way, which is expected from Fnatic, of course, you know, always a little slower start, ramping up when playoffs is coming closer. I think especially the addition of Humanoid from an outside perspective has been huge for them. I think one of their weaknesses last year was that they were just playing so crazy, they were so out of control, they were just, any champion would show on their screen and they just all in and fight without thinking. And now, they still fight a lot, they still play aggressive. I mean, that's kind of a given when Huli is on your team, right?
Yeah.
You can't really avoid that. That's one of the beauties of him. But with Humanoid coming in, with Wonder, with Razork, it's way more controlled, and they're still incredibly strong in all roles. They play so cohesive and decisive. But a lot of the decisions are smarter, and it's just beautiful to see, really.
Yeah, it's beautiful to watch. And now that I hear you two talking about the two teams, they mirror each other in a way. The Rogue, who was a little bit too conservative, now has an extra spice, has Malrang in the jungle that is able to push them forward where is needed. Where Fnatic, they needed, you know, a little bit of less spice. They needed something to slow them down at times. And I think that's nice to see how they are developing themselves. Or do you not agree?
I mean, I still think there's a lot of spice just because, I mean,
Yes.
Hilly's on your team. I do think that it's much more clinical, though. It's the control, it's the refinement.
The refinement. I think that's a great way to say it. Let's check in with the votes then. 37 for Rogue and 63 for Fnatic. Usually when we run a poll, Brox, this was the same when you were here, and Fnatic is in it. He's probably going to win it, but I think maybe the fans are also looking at current form. You already mentioned Humanoid. I think we also have to talk about Larssen. They are the top dogs here in Europe when it comes to the mid lane. They faced off in the final last year, and that's saying something when you can rise up above the mid lane talent that has always been present in Europe, Broxa, and be so consistently good.
I think when I look at Larssen and when I look at Humanoid, it's two names that are so interesting because right as I left LEC after 2019, that was the year when they were really starting to dominate more, starting to really show themselves in the league. And they were new players back then. Now I'm back 2 years later, and all of a sudden these two guys are the best mid laners, really. It doesn't matter if you look at, like, you know, just across the board, in-game performances, stats, they're 1 and 2 in everything. They've been showing up big time, and now at this point, I'm curious to see if some of the older players, you know, the OG best mid laners if they can actually match these two guys.
Great question.
And I think what's really interesting about these two from my perspective is how they're obviously great top of the tree, but in slightly different ways. Because Humanoid is very stable, as Brox was saying. He does fantastic in the early laning phase, and he's very self-sufficient. Larson, he's the person who kind of just hits it out of the park when you get to those team fights. You go through to that mid and late game, and he's someone that will almost carry to a T. You know that he's always going to be very, very responsible with his leads, and his team are giving them that. So it's interesting to see what you want out of your mid laners as to how these teams are starting to
And
perform.
what the teams need, indeed. Fantastic mid lane matchup. And last week, we also saw a new trend emerge among the top laners as Holdbreaker, an item never seen before in LEC history, suddenly took over Summoner's Rift.
In the top lane, we have seen a recent development as well. Not due to a direct change, but as a consequence of all the other changes, and that is Holdbreaker. The top lane pool is shifting slightly into champions that can use the item. Priced at 2,800, the item gives excellent base stats, and that's even before considering the resistances giving from being isolated. Champions like Graves that can struggle to group and find angles to fight against heavy teamfights killing comps with enchanters and hyper carries can look to split push with this item instead. We've also seen Tryndamere adopt the same playstyle, and many other AD fighters can look towards this option as well. Grouping is still an option with Holdbreaker, as the base stats on their own are still good enough. As a bonus, it's also a very good option when used against champions without consistent damage for wave clear. Tanks and AP champions require multiple rotations of spells to clear the buffed up cannon minion.
Yeah, but are you bored of your team throwing the game at neutral objectives? Are you frustrated that every draft wants to scale into late game just to play front-to-back 5v5 teamfights? Sit tight. Holdbreaker is an item that has very recently seen a lot of play and has shifted the top lane meta from boring tanks to split pushers. But let's start from the basics. Holdbreaker as an item has not been touched by any changes in a long time. It has a very easy build path, so it's also easy to purchase with every recall, intentional or not. Its base stats provide a large amount of AD, HP, and HP regen, which makes the item gold efficient at only 2,800 gold. And the passive, that darn passive. Holdbreaker's passive ability is what makes the item so popular these days. While isolated, you and your allied minions gain bonus armor and magic resist, as well as increased damage versus structures. So, since both you and your minions are more durable and hit towers harder, a lot of champions with weak wave clear will struggle to defend their towers, making you a consistent side lane threat that will require the attention of multiple champions to stop you. Being this consistent side lane nuisance and requiring so much attention on that side of the map will also alleviate a lot of pressure from the immobile carries on your team, allowing them to safely scale into the latter stages of the game. One of the most important things to keep in mind is that split push tests the macro and decision-making of every team. Now, more than ever, since structures are going down faster with the addition of Holdbreaker. And I'd like to showcase it here. It's Astralis versus Bifrost from the NOC. 4 Baroned up members took an inhibitor tower and an inhibitor at the same speed as 1 Na with Demolish and Holdbreaker. So, as teams can be forced to fit in a champion that builds the item, the top lane matchups are shifting in favor of the Holdbreaker users. This is one of the reasons why we could see more AP junglers like Gwen and Diana who pair up really well with AD top laners. Here's also a list of the most prominent Holdbreaker champions we could see this weekend on the LEC. Graves, Camille, Na, and conditionally, Tryndamere and Jace. Now, of course, talking about some old and new champions, let's also not forget that this week we are going to be playing on patch 12.4. Nami and Lucian could be seen back in the bot lane as they received both of them buffs. And finally, one of my personal favorites, Nico. Her Q's ability, Bloom, base damage has been increased, providing the champion with more wave clear and additional bursts in trades. Whilst the biggest change in the cooldown of her W being decreased by a full 4 seconds, allowing Nico to get out of sticky situations more frequently. As a lot of teams are now playing in groups of 4, having the split pusher on the side lane, expect Nico to fit in perfectly in the role of zoning, peeling, and kiting for the team's hyper carry. And just as a side note, I'm taller than Nico.
We have it. The proof is in the pudding. We saw it. But she was stealing the show a little bit with her moves, though. But thank you so much for that amazing breakdown. In fact, on another patch, a lot of interesting changes. I think the Lucian Nami one is going to be super interesting to follow, especially for the likes of the teams that love to abuse that laning power. Maybe a final word on the Holdbreaker Broxa as a player yourself. Overpowered or not? Or necessary?
I do think it's an incredibly strong item, and one of the points that Trouble brought up was that it might mean that we're going to see more diversity in the jungle, which is something I would really love to see. More AP junglers would be great. I'm getting a little bored of the Lee, the Sin, the Java, and like basically every game.
You're in the right place in Europe. We try to experiment with those things for sure. Let's take a look at the schedule for today, stacked with action-packed matches, especially games 1 and 3 in the race for playoffs, where we can see Mad, Excel, Vitality, and SK who are hot in that race. But every game matters, I guess we could say. No, not this game. It's a different word. It's every game matters this time around.
Okay, yeah, what they do. I mean, I can't complain about the meaning of it, particularly when you look at game 3, right? You look at that SK, you look at that Vitality, both on the cusp of playoffs. That game is going to be so important.
Broxa, which match are you most excited for?
I have to say Game 4, without a doubt. The Fnatic versus Rogue for many reasons
surprise.
is a very exciting one. But honestly, even Game 2 is a game that a lot of people are not really gonna value that highly. But I think Game 2 is gonna be really interesting because as of right now, both Astralis and BDS have a chance of actually making it to playoffs. And this game could potentially crush one of their dreams and ruin the rest of the
Wow, you just enjoy the heartbreak.
Yeah, you're like, crush their dreams.
But also the opposite. Obviously, we gotta look on the positive side. One of them is still gonna have the chance of making it to playoffs, and yeah, we'll see what happens.
Good save. In any case, the Mad Lions, they very much need to turn it around to not end up as the second team ever in the LEC history to miss playoffs this season after winning the championship. Their support Kaiser is standing by with Lard to talk about how Mad will secure the top 6.
Thank you so much, Shox and Kaiser. Thank you so much for joining me ahead of your game today. It's nice to have in-person interviews again. I know that the past couple of weeks haven't been easy for you guys, but I also remember last year you used to give a lot of praise to the coaching staff and in their ability to help you guys go through hard times. So how is it being working with them this time around, and how did they help you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we've ever been in like this overbad spot that we are like in trouble of even making playoffs, right? But I think our coaching staff really identified what we had to do in the last couple of weeks. Like we focus on like little things, I guess, like focusing, for example, only on mid game, only on early game, only on late game, stuff like this, right? Just having like small wins, like even if we lost a few scrims, right? Like we were like really focusing on like taking house, right? And if we did that well, then we were still happy with the result, right? And I feel like that kind of kept our mental healthy, right? And I think that's what our coaching staff really did a good job on, is like just coaching us individually as well, and keeping our mental up.
Well, that's very nice to hear and super important also in the race of playoffs. But I want to elaborate on what you said, because you talked about the early game, mid game, late game. We know that right now, Mad Lions, interestingly enough, is one of the best early game teams we have in the league. And I remember last year, you used to pop up in team fights. The mid game was where Mad Lions was really popping off in the game. Right now, it feels like everything changed and you now have difficulties navigating through mid game. I know that people mention maybe communication issues, but how do you identify what's going wrong in the mid game especially?
I think right now we are drafting hard for early game. I think that's why our stats are also really good. Like we like especially Elioya is doing a really good job at like coordinating early games, and that's why we usually always get ahead in the early parts. But I think like losing Humanoid as a shot caller definitely hurt us in terms of mid and late game shot calling, and that's kind of hurting us right now because we are still like trying to find our place, like who is doing that job kind of right now. Elioya is still doing a lot in terms of mid game, but I think right now like sometimes we are maybe a bit too hectic. For example, our Baron calls sometimes were a bit too forced, and I think once we get like better at that, I think we will be a really strong team. But yeah, I think we had like some really bad mishaps in the last couple of weeks, which cost us some like really free games, right? But I think we just have to relearn all of that, and once we get better, I think we'll be really strong.
Yeah, and create a new identity maybe around the Mad Lions. And I think the matchup today is going to be really interesting, especially in that sense, because Excel has been rising over the past couple of weeks, and we know that especially in the mid game, you see Patrick popping up in these team fights and usually helping Excel pick up their wins. So what can you tell me about the matchup today against them, and what should you be careful about when playing Excel?
I mean, you mentioned Patrick. I think that's the correct call, right? I think Patrick is a really, really strong player. He has like so many pop-off moments, right? When he gets ahead, I feel like Excel as a team knows how to play around him well as well. With the introduction of Mickey X, they have some like more veteran shot calling maybe as well. I think they look really strong. Like I think they're on a 5-game win streak or something even. I think. It's going to be a tough match, but a really important match because it's up for our playoffs, right? Like we have to beat them kind of to really make it. So yeah, it's going to be really interesting. Also playing against Mickey again after some time. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to it.
Really looking forward also to that matchup on the bot lane. Kaiser, thank you so much for the interview.
Thank you.
Good luck against Excel today, and Shox, back to you.
Thank you so much, Laura. It's very, very awesome to have you back, by the way. And Kaiser, who's just become such a good spokesperson for the Mad Lions over the past few years. And when we speak about the Mad Lions, we're also talking, obviously, about that race for playoffs. Are they going to make it? And I think it would be easy to say, well, what an embarrassment. They might not make it. But you got to look at the facts, right, Roxa? How do you look at the situation they find themselves in, considering that they have 2 new players in key roles?
So a lot of people are extremely surprised about the situation that Mad Lions is in right now. But to be completely honest, you can't expect so many teams to make so many changes and to have all these changes actually work out. And while Mad Lions were incredibly strong last year, they also lost 2 probably key players in Humanoid,
Not probably, you can say that.
in Humanoid and Kasi. I mean, Kaiser even said it just here that Humanoid was a big part of why their mid and late games were going so well, and that is the main problem Mad Lions have been having. They have been having incredible early games because of Kaiser, because of Elyoya. Armut has been a little less shaky, and then it's like, I don't think Riga and Unforgiven have been bad by any means. I think they've been doing fine, but they need someone to control that mid game, control the late game, and sure, you can have Humanoid do that 1 year. Now you need someone else to step up, and I'm excited to see who's going to do it.
Okay, but we could just talk about what they're doing well as well. That'd be great. We could talk about the early game, of course, again, because what Mad Lions have been doing well is using Elyoya as a wrecking ball, right? This guy has been getting leads. His team has been setting up for that. That has included early jungle invades. That has included going for vertical jungle pathing and getting up in the opponent's face. Now, there has been a point where that has fallen apart, but the early game has been really solid.
It has been super solid, and that you brought up the fact of, shot calling and making the decisions. You as a jungler yourself, since Elyoya is the one where he's doing the most in the early game together with Kaiser, is it easy for a jungler to take on that role, or is that suboptimal?
I think in general, almost any role can do it. I think most naturally it's going to come for either the jungler, the mid laner, the support to be like the main voice, be the captain in a sense, take over the game because you're the ones roaming the most around the map, taking part in every play. And I think someone like Elyoya, I would love to see being able to take over the mid game as well, because this guy does so well. He's always ahead. His early game is beautiful. I want to see that translated into them actually winning off of those early leads, because the worst feeling as a jungler is when you have great early games, you always put your team ahead, and then eventually it just falls apart.
That's the case, unfortunately. We also contrasted the early games of the Mad Lions in the summer of 2021 to the spring of 2022 so far, and it's better. And I remember we used to say, oh, Mad, they're the clutch team. They fall behind and then they fight their way out. Ideally, if I could choose, I would like to be the team that has a strong early game lead, but they haven't won a single game in the second half of the season despite those leads. So what would be kind of their, their mission for this game specifically, which is so important in the standings, to make sure that they can take it home?
Well, I think back to 2 games in particular. I think back to their game versus BDS and one versus SK. One was a win, one was a loss, but both were really, really close in a lot of ways because they got those early game leads and they couldn't quite crest it against SK. They haven't been drafting for easy 5v5 wins. I think that maybe at this point, when so many games are on the line, maybe you should probably stop trying to draft towards hyper early game and getting leads through that and actually give you something that can close out the game.
I think in general, when you're playing these stage games, when there's so much pressure, drafting comps that are easy to execute in the mid and late game it's just always nice to have, because you always have something that you can fall back on, even if early game goes wrong. And I think for a team like Math, who already has such a clean early game, there's no need to play more towards the early game. Just play something that's easy to execute, and especially considering that I think that the jungle and the supports, like 2 of it's the important roles for both of these teams. If Matt can continue taking over the game, shut down Marcoon, shut down Mickey, have a stable mid game where they have a plan that's easy to execute, it should be pretty straightforward from there, to be honest.
Yeah, when you talk about the jungle support, there is one graphic I'd like to call up just for the side of the Mad Lions, because it kind of offers for me a conundrum, because these two team up so often in the early game, more than any other team's jungler and support does. But that then also makes me think, all right, but you're leaving your bot laner a little bit too much alone then, because how is he going to catch up in the resources that he's going to need to carry those mid-game fights if you're not there? Or am I reaching too far?
I mean, I can see the temptation, right? Because Mad Lions jungle support was so good last year. They were so good. Almost uncontested, I would say. Now that's not necessarily the case. I think they're still crutching on a little bit, but as you're saying, it leaves some holes in the rest of the game plan which haven't been covered up yet.
I think it's a strategy that can work. I mean, it's something Fnatic was known for in the past, with just caps his lane, put everything into him, and he's going to carry. And I think if you have a jungle and a support that have so good synergy, that's great. Obviously, Unforgiven is left alone a lot of the time, meaning that it's extra important the mid lane gets ahead, and that hasn't really been the case for them.
Yeah, that's a great point. When we look at their opponents, they also have really good jungle support synergy in Mickey and Marcoon. I don't think we talk about Marcoon too often, but he's quietly having an amazing season for Excel as well.
And I mean, every team that he's been on as well, back when he was in the RLs, was very, very important. I know that Trouble is a massive fan of Marcoon. I'm sure she'll tell you all about that. But this is a player which, particularly on the Jin Zhao, and even though he has had a limited champion pool, they have been very clinical in the way that they played around the early game, massively the tip of the spear. And a lot of their victories have come through very precise engages from their jungler.
One thing that I'm looking forward to see in particular in this draft is that, just like you said, Marcoon has basically only played 3 champions. He's played the Xin Zhao, the Lee, the Jarvan, and that's about it. And I think with what we've seen from Elyoya so far, with him pulling out stuff like the Volibear functions really well into all those 3 champs. And I'm just curious to see what jungle matchup we're getting here, because depending on how Mad Lions approach the draft, I think they could have a good opportunity to shut down Marcoon, which would give them a great way to win the game. Now, obviously, if they don't manage to do that, Marcoon gets unleashed, Mickey takes over the shot calling mid to late game, Excel can win as well.
Maybe. And for Excel, of course, the story is the opposite from the Mad Lions. The Mad Lions on the way down, and Excel very much on the way up, now on the brink of making their first playoffs ever. We're going to cover the picks and bans on this desk as well. And we are going to see if that jungle pool gets pinched or not as we get into our first game of the day, the Mad Lions versus Excel.